If I ever write an essay about Marshall McLuhan, one thing I'm sure of is that the title will be Homage to the Runner. Not that I ever actually saw him run during the decade we taught in the same English department at St. Michael's College. In fact, more characteristic was an energetic and loose-limbed, elongated walk, which left you with the impression that, like Leacock's excitable young man, McLuhan was about to ride off in all directions at once. More often than not, he would be accompanied by faculty and students trying to keep up both with the pace and with the momentum of the ideas. By the time I arrived at St. Michael's in 1970, he was already an institution, even a legend, and although no one knew it at the time, his most influential years were already behind him. But if he was an institution, one of the sights of the Toronto campus, he resisted the kind of premature canonization that would have rendered him an honored but harmless academic. As I said, my image of him is as a runner, and in the last decade he kept on moving. Whenever you ran into him, he was always reporting on something new, something exciting. It could be a book he had half read, a piece of research he had just learned about, or even a wingy idea he had had about Lord Durham's report. In fact, it didn't really matter what it was. He was on the move, and we seemed to be standing still, doing our standard research and publishing our usually dull papers. His own image of himself was as a scout, or a prober, or one of the antennae of the race. He was the individual who could look at our society's systems of communications and understand both how they shaped us and how we could use them to reshape ourselves. Everything he wrote about the past, whether the ideal scribal society of the Middle Ages or our fall into alienation during the Renaissance, everything was oriented towards the future. He told one interviewer that he was a conservative and hated all change, but given that change was inevitable, he was damned if he was going to let it roll over him. In his inimitable way, he stayed ahead of it, the runner. Another and different way of putting it is that he himself became the harbinger of changes in thought and fashion. Susan Sontag, for example, wrote a seminal essay on the new sensibility she saw coming into being in the late 1960s, and Marshall McLuhan was one of those she held responsible for it. It's worth recalling, by the way, that some of her other shaping thinkers were Roland Barthes, Antonin Artaud, Friedrich Nietzsche, Levi Strauss, and Ludwig Wittgenstein. Not bad company. And one thing they all had in common was the creation not just of an original or powerful vision, but also of an individual style, a language. Gutenberg Galaxy and Understanding Media, McLuhan's two major works, are written in a subversive style that challenges the hegemony of the word, linear thinking, and the printed page. It's worth reminding ourselves just how challenging and subversive he really was. He was the literary critic who had little use for lit crit, the social theorist who refused to take sociology seriously, and the guru of mass communications who did little research. He could be serious without being solemn, he moved with ease between Madison Avenue and the Academy, and he insisted that from his viewpoint it didn't really matter what we watched on television, Pavarotti or Dionne Warwick. It's also worth reminding ourselves that Canadians were never really comfortable with him, almost as if he were too North American in his élan. After all, he had been on the cover of Time and in a Woody Allen movie. And the Canadian Academy, for all the ostensible honors it gave him, never quite knew what to make of him. He was an original, often brilliant and sometimes exasperating, but an original who resisted categories and classifications, and who didn't attend committee meetings. He was also, and I think we'll only recognize this fully in the next 2 decades, he was also a member of what will eventually be seen as our generation of giants, that group of Canadian intellectuals and artists born between 1900 and 1915 who have decisively altered our sense of ourselves and of our country. Here his peers include Donald Creighton, C.B. Macpherson, Irving Layton, Robertson Davies, and Northrop Frye. It's a company of thinkers and visionaries, and both terms apply to McLuhan, whose thought always had both a visionary and a moral quality. Without him, our intellectual life will be not only duller, but radically impoverished. This is Sam Solecki in Toronto.